Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here. Stop what you're doing. Put down your phone. I need you to understand what just happened in the last 72 hours because the financial media isn't going to tell you the truth. They can't tell you the truth because the truth would collapse the entire system. Elon Musk just finished something that was never supposed to happen. A $2 trillion audit. Not an estimate, not a projection. An actual forensic accounting deep dive into the federal spending apparatus that has been running on autopilot for decades. And what he found isn't just waste. What he found is evidence of the most sophisticated wealth transfer scheme in human history. The number that broke everything was simple. $17.4 billion gone, vanished, with no record of where it went or who authorized the transfer. But that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that when Musk's team tried to trace the missing funds, they hit a wall. Not a bureaucratic wall, not a legal wall, a technological wall. The transaction records had been actively scrubbed from 3 separate government databases. You don't accidentally delete $17 billion. You don't accidentally lose the audit trail for the largest single expenditure outside of defense spending. Someone knew this day was coming. Someone knew that eventually a real auditor with unlimited resources and zero political dependencies would start asking questions, and they prepared for it. The first sign that something was wrong came when Musk's accounting team requested routine documentation from the Treasury Department. Standard stuff, wire transfer authorizations, vendor contracts, payment confirmations. What they got back was a folder of documents that had been redacted so heavily they looked like abstract art, black bars covering every meaningful piece of information. When Musk personally called Treasury Secretary Yellen to request unredacted files, he was told that the information was classified under national security provisions. National security for what? Road maintenance, social services, Medicare payments? Since when does paying for bridges require the same classification level as nuclear weapons? That's when Musk did what Elon Musk does. He went around them. He used his security clearance from SpaceX contracts to access parallel databases. What he found there changed everything. The $17 billion wasn't missing. It was hidden. Deliberately rerouted through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and private equity funds that all traced back to the same 4 investment banks. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and Citadel Securities. These weren't random transactions. These were systematic extractions. Every major government spending bill for the last 6 years had been skimmed. A percentage here, a rounding error there. Death by 1,000 cuts. But when you add it all up, when you trace every phantom payment and every inflated contract, the number isn't 17 billion. The number is closer to 200 billion. $200 billion stolen from taxpayers and funneled directly into the private vaults of Wall Street's biggest players. And the method they used was so simple, it's almost insulting. They inflated every government contract by 15 to 20%, then kicked the excess back to themselves through consulting fees and advisory services that never actually existed. The road project that was supposed to cost $1 billion actually cost $200 million. The extra $800 million went to a consulting firm that exists only on paper. That consulting firm then paid advisory fees to an investment bank. That investment bank then used the money to prop up failing hedge fund positions. Your tax dollars became their emergency liquidity. But Musk didn't just find the money trail. He found the coordination mechanism, a private communication channel that runs through encrypted messaging apps where the biggest names in finance coordinate their extraction schedules. Janet Yellen receives a message that says, infrastructure bill incoming, prep the usual channels. Jerome Powell gets a heads up about when to time the money printer to cover the gaps. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. This isn't some politician taking bribes. This is the systematic hijacking of the entire federal spending apparatus by private financial institutions. They turned the United States Treasury into their personal ATM. And the timing of Musk's audit wasn't an accident. They knew this was coming. For months, there have been whispers in Washington about efficiency reviews and spending cuts. The smart money on Wall Street has been quietly repositioning, liquidating positions, moving money offshore, preparing for the moment when someone with unlimited resources and zero political constraints would start digging. The reaction from the financial establishment has been immediate and desperate. Within hours of Musk's preliminary findings going public, the major banks issued statements claiming the audit was flawed. They demanded access to Musk's methodology. They threatened lawsuits. They called in political favors. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. The Federal Reserve, which supposedly operates independently from Wall Street influence, issued an emergency statement defending the integrity of government financial operations. The Fed, defending Wall Street, against an audit that exposes theft from taxpayers. They're not even pretending anymore. The mask is completely off. The Federal Reserve is openly admitting that they are protecting the banks that have been systematically looting the Treasury. And Musk isn't backing down. In fact, he's escalating. He's announced that the full audit results will be published on X, unredacted, in their entirety. Every transaction, Every shell company, every phantom payment, $2 trillion of government spending laid bare for the world to see. Wall Street is panicking, not because they're afraid of fines or regulations. They've been paying those for decades as a cost of doing business. They're panicking because Musk has something they can't buy, can't threaten, and can't control. Complete financial independence. He doesn't need their money. He doesn't need their approval. And he definitely doesn't need their protection. The emergency meetings started immediately. Private jets landing at private airports. CEOs who supposedly compete with each other suddenly discovering they need to have urgent face-to-face conversations. The kind of meetings that don't appear on any calendar and don't generate any public records. They're trying to figure out how to contain this. How do you silence someone who owns the world's most influential social media platform? How do you discredit someone who's built multiple trillion-dollar companies from scratch? How do you intimidate someone who's already changed the trajectory of human civilization multiple times? The answer is simple. You can't, and they know it. Which is why we're seeing something we've never seen before in modern finance. Actual panic, not the controlled volatility they create to shake out retail investors, not the manufactured crises they use to justify bailouts. Real, genuine terror that their entire system of legalized theft is about to be exposed. The market started showing the stress immediately. Bank stocks began hemorrhaging value, not because of fundamentals, not because of earnings, because investors are starting to understand that if Musk's audit gains traction, if it leads to actual prosecutions, if it results in real accountability, the entire business model of modern finance collapses. These banks don't make money from banking anymore. They make money from government extraction. They make money from regulatory capture. They make money from being too big to prosecute. If that protection goes away, if the political class can no longer guarantee immunity, these institutions become worthless overnight. And the political response has been just as revealing. The same politicians who spent years calling for transparency and accountability are suddenly very concerned about the methodology of Musk's audit. They're worried about economic stability. They're demanding oversight of the oversight. Nancy Pelosi, who built a $100 million stock portfolio on government information, is now deeply concerned about the constitutional implications of private citizens auditing public spending. Chuck Schumer, who has taken millions in Wall Street donations, is worried about market disruption. Mitch McConnell, whose wife sits on the boards of multiple financial institutions, thinks Musk is overstepping his authority. They're not defending the system because they believe in it. They're defending it because they've been bought and paid for by the same institutions that Musk is exposing. But the most terrifying revelation isn't what Musk found. It's what he hasn't found yet. Because the $17 billion in missing funds, that's just from the last 6 months. His team is now going back through 6 years of records, 6 years of inflated contracts, 6 years of phantom payments, 6 years of systematic extraction. If the 6-month sample represents the full pattern, we're not looking at $200 billion in stolen funds. We're looking at over $1 trillion. $1 trillion taken from roads that don't get built, from schools that don't get funded, from infrastructure that crumbles while Wall Street builds bigger bonuses. The reaction from international observers has been swift and devastating. The European Central Bank issued a statement expressing concerns about the integrity of U.S. financial institutions. The Bank of China announced they're reviewing their exposure to American banking counterparties. Even traditional allies are starting to distance themselves. They're not just worried about the money, they're worried about what this means for the global financial system. If the United States Treasury has been compromised by private interests, if American banks have been operating as extraction mechanisms rather than financial institutions, what does that mean for the dollar's reserve currency status? The smart money is already moving. Gold sales are spiking. Bitcoin is rallying. Sovereign wealth funds are quietly diversifying away from dollar-denominated assets. They can read the writing on the wall. When the full scope of this theft becomes public, when the complete audit results hit the internet, the confidence in American financial institutions won't recover for decades. And Musk knows it. That's why he's not negotiating. That's why he's not looking for a settlement. That's why he's refusing every backroom deal and every political compromise. He understands that this is bigger than money. This is about whether the United States remains a functioning republic or completes its transformation into a financial extraction zone run by Wall Street. The next phase of the audit focuses on the Federal Reserve itself, not just their interaction with the Treasury, but their entire operation, the emergency lending facilities, the repo market interventions, the quantitative easing programs that somehow always benefit the same financial institutions that are being exposed for Treasury theft. Musk's team has already found preliminary evidence that the Fed's independence is a complete fiction. Every major monetary policy decision for the last 5 years has been coordinated with the same banks that benefit from the policy. It's not independent monetary policy. It's coordinated wealth extraction with government backing. The implications are staggering. If the Fed has been operating as a private wealth transfer mechanism rather than a central bank, then every economic crisis they've managed was actually manufactured to justify more extraction. Every emergency they've solved was created to expand their own power and their partners' profits. We're looking at the complete collapse of institutional trust, not just in banks, not just in government, in the entire structure of American economic power. And unlike 2008, unlike every previous financial crisis, there's no one to blame except the institutions themselves. They can't blame poor people for taking out mortgages they couldn't afford. They can't blame foreign governments for economic manipulation. They can't blame technology or demographics or global trends. This is pure, undiluted, systematic theft by the most powerful financial institutions in the world. The question now isn't whether this will destroy Wall Street's credibility. The question is whether American democracy can survive the revelation that its entire financial system has been captured by private interests. And Musk isn't stopping at exposure. He's building something new, a parallel financial infrastructure that bypasses the traditional banking system entirely, peer-to-peer transactions, transparent ledgers, real-time auditing, everything the current system was designed to prevent. The old guard can feel their monopoly slipping away. Not just their money, their control, their ability to extract wealth from every economic transaction, their power to create crises and profit from the solutions. They've spent decades building a system where they couldn't lose, where every economic outcome, positive or negative, generated profits for them, where they were too big to fail, too connected to prosecute, and too important to audit. That era is ending. The audit is just the beginning. When the full scope of this theft becomes public, when every American understands how much of their wealth has been stolen, the political pressure for real change will become unstoppable. But the window for peaceful reform is closing rapidly. As more evidence emerges, as the true scale of the extraction becomes clear, the calls for justice will become calls for revolution. And when that happens, when the American people fully comprehend how thoroughly they've been betrayed, the institutions responsible won't survive the reckoning. The $2 trillion audit isn't just an accounting exercise. It's the beginning of the end for the financial oligarchy that has controlled American economic policy for generations. They know it. We know it. And most importantly, they know that we know it. The question isn't whether change is coming. The question is whether that change will come through the system or in spite of it.